Death is a theme that has haunted human thought for millennia. From the ancient world to modern times, philosophers, poets, and thinkers have grappled with the inescapable end that awaits us all. History is filled with reflections on mortality, with examples that have become emblematic of our struggle to find meaning in the face of death. Take for instance the trial and death of Socrates, a moment immortalized in philosophy, almost mythologized in its importance. Socrates' acceptance of his fate, his willingness to face death with composure, offers one of the earliest examples of confronting mortality. It poses the question, what does it mean to live a life of integrity when death looms over everything we do? Then there's the existentialist perspective, which forces us to confront our mortality in a more personal and perhaps unsettling way. As human beings, we are faced with the stark choice to either despair over the certainty of death or, as Kierkegaard suggests, to take a leap of faith. This leap, in Kierkegaardian terms, involves placing trust in the sacrosanct vitality of the cosmos, in the mysterious forces of life, evolution, and the divine, even though they remain beyond our full understanding. This is where Ernest Becker's The Denial of Death enters the picture. While Becker was not a philosopher in the traditional sense, his work engages deeply with both philosophical and psychological traditions. Becker's central thesis is the following: that all of human behavior, our craving for meaning, our cultural practices, and our anxieties arise from an unconscious fear of death. He argues that we deny death, and this denial shapes the very structures of our societies. By creating elaborate systems, religious, cultural, and psychological, we attempt to distract ourselves from the terrifying reality of our own mortality. In this video, we'll dive into Becker's bold ideas about how humans cope with the fear of death and explore how his work connects with the rich history of philosophical thought on this most profound of human concerns. Western society since Newton, no matter how scientific or secular it claims to be, is still as religious as any other. According to Becker, civilized society is a hopeful collection of beliefs and actions, where people protest against their insignificance by clinging to science, money, and material goods, believing these things make them count for more than any other animal. Everything that humans do is, at its core, religious and heroic. An attempt to transcend the limitations of their physical existence, yet always in danger of being fictitious and fallible. Becker uses the concept of organismic narcissism, which stems from his understanding of human development, particularly through his understanding of the work of Freud and Rank. Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, introduced the idea that the child's early psychological development is driven by the quest for security and self-worth. From birth, the infant is helpless and dependent on caregivers for survival. This dependency creates a fundamental need for love, attention, and validation, what Freud identified as the child's struggle for a secure sense of self, rooted in feelings of self-esteem. Otto Rank, one of Freud's early disciples, took these ideas further, arguing that the primary human conflict stems not from sexuality, but from the fear of death. For Rank, the child's need for self-esteem is the foundation of all heroic striving, our basic existential project to overcome the terror of death. Becker builds on this idea, suggesting that our drive for self-worth is not only about survival in the biological sense, but also about transcending our mortal condition. The child's narcissistic need for self-esteem is deeply tied to the human need to feel significant, to matter, and to be remembered. This is what Becker calls the heroic project. Society itself is a codified system of heroism, offering various roles, beliefs, and achievements through which individuals can assert their value and deny death. These heroic projects, which Becker calls immortality projects, are essentially ways for us to convince ourselves that we are not simply finite beings, bound to die and be forgotten. Through our accomplishments, creations, or by contributing to something larger than ourselves, whether it's a nation, a religion, or even a family name, we attempt to secure a sense of permanence. The problem is These immortality projects are fragile and fleeting, constantly threatened by the reality of death. Becker emphasizes that these pursuits, no matter how great, are ultimately attempts to obscure the truth of our mortality. Becker even goes so far as to suggest that if everyone were to admit their urge to be a hero, it would unleash a devastating truth. To become fully conscious of what one is doing to earn this sense of heroism is, in his view, the central self-analytic problem of life. This insight forces people to recognize the fragile, often illusory nature of the systems they use to affirm their significance. Yet Becker acknowledges this quest is universal and even unavoidable. Society cannot function properly without offering these hero systems that give individuals a sense of worth within a collective framework. This drives Becker to pose the fundamental question he asks in this book. Why is the world such a terrible place that humans feel the need to escape from it? Why do people go to such lengths to avoid confronting the reality of death, rather than facing it openly and bravely? The answer, Becker suggests, lies in the very core of the human condition. For centuries, philosophers have searched for the essence of man, hoping to discover some unique substance or special quality that makes human beings distinct. But, as Becker points out, Erich Fromm, another influential thinker, argues that man has no essence. Fromm believes that what makes us unique is precisely this paradoxical nature. Humans are half animal and half symbolic. This idea, which traces back to Kierkegaard's book, The Concept of Anxiety, captures the central paradox of our existence. On one hand, we share the biological, animalistic nature of all living creatures. We are driven by survival, physical needs, and instinct. But on the other hand, we possess something more, a symbolic identity, a self-awareness that allows us to reflect on our existence and project meaning into the world. It is this awareness that curses us with the knowledge of our own mortality, a knowledge that no other animal has to bear. The origin of this idea traces back to Kierkegaard's analysis of the biblical Adam and Eve myth, where the original sin of eating the fruit of knowledge represents the dawning of human self-consciousness, the awareness of death. This existential awakening burdens man with a unique form of suffering. He becomes aware not only of his life, but also of his inevitable death. Man's tragedy lies in his ability to live in two worlds, the animal world, where survival is the only concern, and the symbolic world, where meaning, identity, and the denial of death dominate his thoughts. Becker encapsulates this dilemma perfectly, and I quote, "Man is literally split in two. He has an awareness of his own splendid uniqueness, in that he sticks out of nature with a towering majesty. And yet, at the end of his lifetime, he goes back into the ground to rot and disappear forever. It is a terrifying dilemma to be in and to have to live with." This dual nature, as Becker describes, is a source of constant psychological conflict. Humans are aware of their splendid uniqueness, the sense that they are more than mere animals, that their lives are significant in some unique way. Yet, despite this sense of importance, they must ultimately return to the ground, indistinguishable from any other decaying organism. This contradiction is at the heart of the human condition, and it's no wonder that for many, simply contemplating this thought could drive them to despair, or even madness. Or as the French philosopher Pascal describes it, men are so necessarily mad that not to be mad would amount to another form of madness. The existential dualism, the clash between our symbolic selves and our animal mortality, creates an impossible situation for the human mind to reconcile. It's a problem without a solution, an excruciating dilemma that haunts us. Faced with this terrifying reality, human life is dedicated to escaping this knowledge through the hero projects, which we described earlier in this video. These projects can take many forms, pursuing fame, wealth, power, or even moral righteousness. In fact, nearly every aspect of human civilization, from social institutions to personal ambitions, is in some way an attempt to deny death. And they come at a cost. We drive ourselves into a kind of blind obliviousness through social games, psychological tricks, and personal preoccupations, which are often far removed from the reality of our situation. In this way, much of what we consider normal human activity can be seen as a kind of madness, a shared collective delusion that shields us from the terrifying truth of our mortality. Becker's argument is clear. All human striving, all the ways we seek to elevate ourselves are ultimately forms of distraction from the horrifying reality that we will one day cease to exist. The heroic projects we undertake may bring temporary relief or meaning, but they are ultimately fragile constructs designed to protect us from the terror we refuse to face. Men incapable of liberty, who cannot stand the terror of the sacred that manifests itself before their open eyes, must turn to mystery, must hide the truth. Transference, as developed by Freud, is a psychological phenomenon where an individual redirects feelings and desires from one person or object to another. In the context of the denial of death, transference helps individuals project their deepest anxieties outward and attach them to external structures or figures, thereby avoiding a direct confrontation. In Totem and Taboo, Freud explains that actions forbidden to individuals can be justified if shared by a group. This idea forms the foundation of collective rituals, where acts of violence or sacrifice are transformed into sacred duties and are thereby justified. From an anthropological viewpoint, sacrificial rituals exemplify this phenomenon. The chosen victim is not just a casualty. They are sacrificed, offered to gods, nature, or fate. This act grants the community a symbolic renewal, life through death. In this context, the victim's death is seen as the ultimate service, a contribution that reinforces the social fabric. William James highlighted that fear is simply the inverse of desire. While adults grapple with fears surrounding death and sexuality, a child's fear is more primal, a fear of life itself. Fromm popularized this in his work as the fear of freedom. This paradox of fear reflects the human struggle to balance individual existence with the need for collective belonging. The essence of transference lies in this need, to manage the fear of death. Becker describes 3 ways in which transference to deny death occurs. The first motive for transference is a human longing to merge with something greater. This desire stems from the horror of isolation, being left to one's own limited resources. Aligning oneself with a larger cause or group mitigates this fear. It creates a comforting sense of connection and self-expansion, offering peace and a feeling of oneness with a broader reality. This allows individuals to anchor themselves within ideologies. In doing so, they project their anxieties outward, taming the chaos of existence and finding temporary solace. This coping strategy, however, comes with significant implications. It can lead to unwavering loyalty to figures or systems, even to the detriment of personal growth or societal health. The second motive for transference involves the projection of inner conflicts onto external figures or structures. This process begins with the individual's struggle to manage internal anxieties and uncertainties, fears that often stem from deep-seated insecurities and unresolved emotional conflicts. When faced with these aspects of their psyche, many find solace in transferring their worries onto an outside force. By projecting these fears onto a leader, an ideology, or an institution, people externalize their inner chaos and make it more tangible and seemingly controllable. This projection serves a dual purpose. It simplifies complex personal issues and creates a shared enemy or problem that can be confronted collectively. The individual's emotional turmoil is no longer an isolated battle, but part of a broader narrative in which others are also engaged. This shared sense of purpose creates a feeling of unity, reinforcing bonds within a group or community. Yet, the implications of this projection can be profound and even detrimental. Dependence on the chosen object of transference often results in unwavering loyalty, regardless of the consequences. The attachment becomes a crutch, preventing individuals from confronting their own psychological growth or seeking healthier ways of managing their internal conflicts. This dependence can evolve into fanaticism, where the protection of the external figure or ideology supersedes reason and leads to harmful outcomes for both the individual and society. The third and last motive for transference is the displacement of personal responsibility. For many, the inherent freedom and autonomy that come with human existence are paradoxically suffocating. The power to make choices and the burden of accountability weigh heavily on those aware of the consequences that follow every decision. This awareness can paralyze action, fostering a sense of existential dread rooted in the fear of making the wrong choice or failing to live up to one's own potential. Transference, in this context, provides an escape route. By shifting the responsibility for major life decisions onto an external authority, be it a political leader, religious figure, or a collective belief system, individuals can experience a profound sense of relief. This displacement allows individuals to navigate life without the full burden of personal agency. They find comfort in aligning with a cause or following a leader who seems to embody certainty and purpose. This allegiance to an external source grants them the reassurance that they are part of a guided path, one that shares and validates their values and fears. However, the trade-off for this comfort is significant. By surrendering personal responsibility, individuals risk losing their autonomy and critical thinking. They become embedded in collective belief systems that can suppress dissenting ideas and stifle personal development. The reliance on external authorities for moral or strategic direction can create a culture of conformity, where challenging the status quo is seen as betrayal, rather than a necessary act of growth. But what does all of this reveal? It shows that the challenge we face is not just the certainty of death, but also the extraordinary lengths we go to in order to obscure that truth. Transference serves as a means to buffer this fear. What drives transference is the intrinsic need for other people to affirm our existence, which can serve as a way to deny death. Human interactions give us a sense of meaning that abstract ideals cannot provide. Carl Jung spoke of this as an instinctual kinship libido, emphasizing that the urge for connection is not just emotional, but essential to our being. Martin Buber further illustrated this by describing the experience of imagining the real. We see in others the life-affirming elements that help us transcend ourselves. In other words, through our relationships and how we are perceived by others, we find the deeper nourishment needed for our own growth and self-worth. Transference then becomes more than just a coping mechanism, but more so a fundamental way we validate our heroic sense of self and pursue personal meaning. Becker ends his thesis with a critique on psychology. According to Becker, psychology makes promises it cannot possibly fulfill. Modern psychotherapy often markets itself as a pathway to happiness, love, freedom, and personal fulfillment. But how can these promises be genuinely upheld when the problem of life itself is so fundamental? As Becker starkly puts it, we must remember that life itself is the insurmountable problem. Psychology may help us navigate day-to-day challenges, but it cannot eliminate the existential terror at the core of being human, the knowledge of our mortality. Becker critiques modern psychology for focusing disproportionately on symptom management, addressing anxiety, depression, and other emotional struggles, without tackling their underlying cause, death anxiety. By directing its effort toward alleviating immediate discomfort, psychology often avoids engaging with the deeper existential fears that shape the human experience. For Becker, this avoidance limits psychology's potential and keeps it from addressing the central problem of life, which is the inevitability of death and the search for meaning in its shadow. This avoidance, Becker argues, reduces psychology to a tool for enabling individuals to function within society, rather than confronting the core existential dilemma. Instead of seeking to cure individuals or provide temporary relief from symptoms, Becker suggests that psychology should help people confront their fears about mortality directly. In his view, engaging with death anxiety rather than fleeing from it is essential for any genuine exploration of the human condition. Becker further critiques modern psychology for acting as a new form of immortality ideology, a substitute for religion that fails to fully address humanity's need for transcendence. Yet, psychology, grounded in rationalism, cannot fulfill this role because it lacks the sacred, transcendent dimensions that religion traditionally provides. Religion acknowledges humanity's inherent flaws, offering the solace of divine grace or a cosmic order that redeems human frailty. Psychology, by contrast, attempts to provide solutions within the bounds of our finite nature, solutions that Becker views as insufficient and ultimately circular. Becker offers a provocative critique. In its attempt to provide solutions, psychology can begin to mirror religion. A therapy session, he suggests, can function much like a sermon, offering comforting narratives about self-improvement, healing, and personal growth. However, the problem is that this is yet another heroic project, a way for individuals to distract themselves from the inevitability of death. Therapy becomes a new ritual for constructing meaning, one that attempts to convince us that self-awareness and personal growth are enough to overcome the human condition. How can an ego-controlled animal change his structure? How can a self-conscious creature change the dilemma of his existence? He concludes that no psychological practice can transcend the limits of the human condition, because these limits are the foundation of what it means to be human. Self-awareness, the very feature that makes us unique, also makes us painfully aware of the impossibility of escaping death. Psychology can offer tools to cope with certain symptoms, but it cannot address the root cause without becoming a belief system itself. Yet, unlike religion, psychology lacks a unifying, transcendent vision. It cannot promise eternal salvation, only incremental change. As Becker puts it, religion regards man as fundamentally flawed, but redeemable through connection with the divine. Psychology, in its secular framework, must view man as a problem to be solved within his own finite limits. This is where Becker finds its approach lacking. It offers no ultimate escape from the insurmountable problem of life and death. Becker suggests that psychology, no matter how advanced, can never replace religion. While religion humbles humanity by framing it within a cosmic context, psychology's focus on self-awareness risks creating an isolating illusion of autonomy. For psychology to truly evolve, Becker argues, it must shift its focus from curing symptoms to helping individuals confront the existential realities of death and meaning. Only by daring to face these fears can humanity engage with the deepest truths of existence. The human condition, with all its contradictions, cannot be escaped. It can only be faced, if one dares.